haven't really paid attention to any British politics for the last year and a half or something, maybe even longer.
Mm.
I guess I was like a Corbyn burnout, but
Yeah, true.
I've tried to read the manifesto. Well, I've read the manifestos from all the parties. I don't know, compared to American politics, like UK is just so fucking boring. Like the candidates are boring, the manifestos are boring. Current situation's kind of boring. I don't know what the fuck. What do you do with this? What happens?
I mean,
How do you deal with it?
most things, what's mostly been happening, because as you say, the manifestos basically have very little in them. There's nothing to choose from, especially between the main parties, really and truly, between Tories, between Labour, between Lib Dems. Like, you can vote Tories for some tax cuts and national service for 18-year-olds. Lib Dems have their skills wallets plan to give £5,000 of adult education, which I think is quite a good policy, but it's
Hmm.
tinkering around the edges. Like, Labour probably have the biggest kind of direction change, which is this idea that they want to move to more kind of industrial strategy focused economic model, to nationalize the rail franchises when they expire, but not nationalize the rolling stock. And they've got this kind of
Hmm.
sleight of hand they're doing with this GB energy policy, which they tell people publicly that it's a publicly owned energy company. It's not. It's just a venture capital fund owned by the state that will give like share equity in private energy companies. So it's not going to produce or sell or supply or transmit any of its own energy. It's just going to have a share stake in other private energy firms. And I'm not saying this is a bad policy. It's fine. It's certainly better than the Conservative government giving £500,000 or whatever it was in subsidy to Tata Steel for them to cut jobs anyway. And it allows there to be some control over the direction. This is a Mazzucato style policy. This idea of having the economy working towards national missions. Not that I think it's going to be successful, but I can see where they're going in by. But it's a lie. Like, to tell people it's a publicly owned energy company is a lie. If you're going to have this policy, at least campaign on what it is rather than what it isn't. There's not nationalisation. Like, all of the actual
Hmm.
infrastructure is still all going to be privately owned. There's going to be a very, like, 25% stake, I think, is the maximum the government's going to get, because they're expecting £3 of private investment for every £1 of public investment, and they're selling the
Hmm.
country this idea that it's a publicly owned energy company, and that's not it, right? It's just a bit of it's a bit of state funding to go into the private energy sector to fund a green transition or to de-risk capital for the private sector. And they also do like this massive PFI plan, like BlackRock funding Britain, whatever it's called, for national infrastructure projects as well. So in terms of how we're going to be changing the structure of the economy, the Labour Party are not promising anything remotely close to a large scale change at all.
Oh yeah, no, it's I wonder why they don't. I wonder what other countries call it, because I know that the Great British Energy thing is fairly similar to what a lot of people are doing in like even America and the rest of Europe now, especially because of the I guess because of the shock of the Russian invasion, right? Like no one wants to get hit by 10% inflation again because we depend on Russian energy, right? So yeah, like it makes sense, but I wonder like if they could have just called it anything else, because yeah, it's not nationalization in the slightest. It's also like,
They also strip back the funding too. It used to be £28 billion per
mhm.
year of public investment. It's now 4.7 billion extra. It's like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
really really scaled back in terms of scale, and they're trying to tell people this is going to be their way of being able to create these new jobs. And Stiglitz is right by criticizing the Labour Party policies on scale, but saying the idea of investment in industry to create new jobs through industrial strategy is going to increase wages. I'm like, yeah, it would, but it will only increases wages if you're using Keynesian stimulus to get the growth that you need to see wage growth, right? That's the big problem here, is this idea that we can't spend money, we can't fiscally expand, right? Interest rates are coming down, predicted to come down. They're not that high anyway, but they're predicted to come down. Bond yields are at historic kind of normal levels, not like the low that Clement Attlee had, but not as high as they were during like the 80s during the winter of discontent. And inflation is now back down at the Bank of England target because the cost push has gone through the economy. We're not living in a world where we have to deal with inflation forever. It was indeed transitory because you had to deal with the cost push inflation because of these shocks, as you say. And the fact that in the wake of all of this, they're not doing the investment they need to create the good jobs and the good wages. They're not actually nationalising or having a project for more national ownership of all of this critical infrastructure, which, as you say, in a more kind of fractured world post Russian invasion of Ukraine, is necessary. I don't see how they're going to protect us, get the growth that we need, or indeed sell the country on their vision for the future when Nigel Farage is waiting in the wings when they fail in 5 years' time.
I guess that's what they've really. I feel like that's what they've done is they've put forward a few things that I think as a concept like that Great British Energy, even though it's not nationalization, I still think it's a I think it's a good thing compared to what we
It's
have
fine, yeah,
now. Like
exactly,
they've
yeah.
done it in America. I think the National Wealth Fund sounds like a good idea. I think the Breakfast Club sound like a good idea. I think what was the other one? Oh, the yeah, even the railways. Like I understand, like it's probably going to be it would be insanely expensive to nationalize the rolling stock companies as well. But it's all just like it's even less than Biden's been doing similar stuff to this with the infrastructure bills, but that's like the difference is that that's massively deficit financed, whereas it feels like Keir just wants to, he doesn't want to raise taxes, he doesn't want to do more cuts, and he doesn't want to borrow more. So it's like if he's saying all those three things, like the problem is you can't
Hmm.
do any cool things. Like you have to do one of
Exactly.
those things to do something good. So it's just like I don't know. I really feel like there could have been something especially with the advantage he has. And it's like it's not as if these things are unpopular, but I think one of the things I heard from Mick Lynch was that he was saying that I don't know if this is true, but it feels true, is that the idea of taxing or borrowing to fund big projects is generally quite popular in polls, but not at the ballot box. So people will spend 4 years saying that it's a really good idea to raise taxes to introduce these new services and new innovations. But if it's in a manifesto or if a party says they're going to do it like 2 weeks to the polls, they just vote against it. But that means that like he's going to have to do something, right? When he's in office to make this manifesto make sense, he's either going to cut or continue cuts, or he's going to borrow or he's going to tax. I'm like, we just have to guess, I suppose.
So their plan for not doing cuts. So forget any of the expansionary policies or any kind of brand new things that they want to fund. Just on current budgets, right? The Institute for Fiscal Studies has been looking at the plans for the Labour government and the Labour manifesto and saying, well, look, you've promised all of these increases in funding for protected departments in the public sector, but you've promised very
Mm,
few, if any, tax rises. They've got the taxation on private schools and a one-off windfall tax on the energy companies, and then there's the non-dom tax status that the Tories have already stolen from them and they've already implemented in a budget. I think it was 2 budgets ago. So the IFS
mm,
have said, okay, we want this extra funding for protected departments, but unprotected departments are going to have an
Because I'm
increased
literally a
burden in
communist.
terms of public spending over the next, however many few years. If you do not raise taxes because you're protecting other protected departments, these unprotected departments will see cuts of £18 billion. And so their plan would say is, oh, we're going to get growth, right? If we have 2.5% growth, that's an extra £47 billion worth of public coffers money, which we can then use to spend in this household budget algorithm they've got going on, rather than treating it more kind of holistically. And I'm like, okay, you want 2.5% growth. You keep saying you want the biggest growth in the G7. It's one of Keir Starmer's clear missions, one of the 5 missions he set out. But if you don't do Keynesian stimulus, like how are you going to get this growth? There seems to be their entire growth plan is just deregulate the planning sector, hope the private sector invests. That's it. That's all they've got going for them at the moment.
yeah, this is that's the conspiracy of silence they're talking about, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
IFS. Yeah, yeah. Because it's like, yeah, because I think right now, if because they said that they're going to stick to the current fiscal plan, right? The fiscal limits, which means no
Mm-hmm.
more borrowing than what the current government allows. And then just a complete silence on the unprotected services, which are set to be cut anyway. So you'd actually have to do like a proactive move to not cut them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fuck. It's like I can't believe it took me this long, but now I know whenever you hear someone say a fully costed manifesto, that means nothing. Like fully costed is like because you can have a goal and then cost it and say how you're going to pay for it, but the amount you're going to pay for it, you're going to spend on the goal is not going to be anywhere near enough to achieve that goal. And then for things that are going to that might get hurt, you just don't mention them. Just leave them out of your manifesto, and it's a fully costed. Oh God, I can't believe that that scam has lasted for a fully costed manifesto. It means
I mean,
nothing.
Corbyn
Like,
was the first to do it. Like literally, if John McDonnell's, John McDonnell was obsessed with the idea that they could win the election. Or as we saw in 2017, they promised all this stuff and they massively increased their vote share. In fact, they're probably going to get more votes than Keir Starmer did, both in percentage and
mm,
in nominal terms in 2017 than they are going to do now. There's just a vote split on the right, and the demographics of vote Labour has changed. But that's a story for probably later on. But even so, like this costed manifesto stuff was John McDonnell's way of saying, well, look, we need to show the country that left-wing economics are credible. He
mm.
invented the fiscal rules. The fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves is now adhering to is like this important part of their party policy. It's more important to them. It was less down the there was other key things that John McDonnell wanted to be able to see before the fiscal rules became so important, and also interest rates and bond yields were lower, so it was less important. But either way, right? All of these things came from the Corbyn era of we have to promise people that we can be trusted in government. People didn't cost manifestos. Ken Clarke, during the election debates in 2017, said that manifestos should never be costed because, as you say, it's all just like nonsense numbers. Like Reform UK have a fully costed manifesto off of cutting all government departments by 5% and also changing the QE interest payments for the Bank of England. And also, on top of that, they're just going to be able to find government efficiency savings somewhere as well. It's nonsense. It means nothing. This means
it's all waste.
nonsense.
They've been doing that since UKIP as well. Like every cut they're going to make is actually just waste. Like we've just found all this waste that no one else can see. That's like 50 billion worth. Yeah, that's a good scam. I like that. The waste thing.
If David Cameron couldn't find them, because Darren Jones, the shadow chief secretary of the Treasury for the Labour Party, has said that they want to reform public services to be able to save money and make them more efficient. I'm sorry, if George Osborne and David Cameron, during like the austerity blitz of the coalition government, couldn't find the efficiency savings they said they were going to get, what makes you think that Labour and Reform are going to find them? It's the most asinine electoral talking points, and they never get called out for it by our journalists, in the same way that Wes Streeting essentially says we'll be able to find private sector capacity to help the NHS waiting list. It doesn't exist. That's all NHS services and doctors on doing extra overtime for the private sector from the NHS in their own time, rather. Sorry. And on top of that, do you really think if the private sector had spare capacity to bring down waiting lists, the Tories wouldn't have done it already? The people who love the private sector and hate the NHS, and he never gets questioned on it.
Did this ever? I never watched the Question Time thing. Was he not brought up to task on any of those things? Because it was like because the Reform Manifesto is insane, right? Like it's like we're just going to find 50 billion of waste and then cut all these things, which are again apparently all just wasteful. And then the promise for the NHS would that would be impossible. And the vouchers for private care, who's going to pay for that? You're going to they're not going to force private healthcare workers to treat you for free.
No, exactly.
Is that like a discount or I don't know. So they just want to pay for it, which is just like the NHS. That's the state paying for your healthcare. Yeah,
and that's after they've cut the healthcare budget by 5% under their cost cutting measures. Right? It's completely nonsensical. And again, that's the private sector capacity doesn't exist. If you give somebody a voucher to go private, that just pushes an NHS patient one person back in the queue, because it's the same brick and mortar infrastructure and it's the same staff broadly. There's a very, very tiny sector of the healthcare service that is done privately because they don't have A&E, they don't have anything that costs things that aren't that have any services that aren't profitable. That's all the NHS doing the unprofitable stuff. The private sector does the profitable things. And the NHS already sends you to private care for the profitable things anyway, because that's where the infrastructure is, and that's already being used for the NHS. So that this spare capacity, it literally does not exist. And this is another thing that the media, there's one thing that I would say has been terrible throughout the entirety of the election campaign, is that our media, our journalists are terrible. They haven't got a clue what they're talking about. They don't know how economics works. They haven't read the manifestos. They haven't scrutinized any of the plans at all. Yet all we're talking about is, does a woman have a penis? Like, it drives me insane. It really does.
What? So this didn't come up in the Question Time thing with Farage?
I've not watched the Farage one. We just finished watching Adrian Ramsey when I jumped in. So
because I know was he on a show not long ago where he was getting a little bit blown out, but that wasn't BBC. What was that? I don't know. Fuck.
Forget which one, but I've not seen Nigel Farage like properly questioned on the intricacies of these things. Just somebody saying the numbers don't add up, and I'm like, well, at the end of the day, I think mostly manifestos need to be mood music for the kind of vision they want to see for the country. And as you say, this fully costed stuff is kind of nonsensical, really. Just give us a rough idea of what you want to do, and then we'll see where it gets to. Like, if the Greens don't raise their £70 billion from their wealth taxes and capital gains tax changes, they're not going to crash the economy and spend more money than they've got. They're just going to reduce the amount of extra investment that they're doing. Like, that's what's going to happen, really and truly. If your fully costed plans don't raise as much money as you expect, it's not going to lead to this kind of hellhole world of like doom loop economic crisis that people seem to say that it will do. But even so, like, the plans fail even on their own terms, just because reform would lead to terrible outcomes. Like, the kind of tax cuts they want to do are going to make rich people richer because they're giving a small amount of tax cut to poor people, but these sweeping tax cuts to high earners and also to businesses and also to corporations. So that's why I would criticize.
And also to us, right? Is it them or is it the Conservatives or Reform who are saying that there's no more national insurance for self-employed people?
The
I think it's maybe
Tories.
Tories.
It's the Tories.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Mel
Okay.
Stride got questioned on this by Krishna Guru Murthy. It's like, if you're not paying national insurance, how are you going to prove your eligibility for the state pension? And Mel Stride just didn't have a fucking answer to it because it's been like written on the back of a fag packet. That's all that's been happened.
Mm.
The Tories just the Tory. There's one funny thing about the election though. It's just the capitulation of the Conservative brand. The party it's dead. It's gone. It's over for the Tories. They're polling at like below 20%. It's over.
Yeah. I don't know. I was like, I I thought at least Corbyn, when he was talking about all his plans, at least he said that he would raise taxes on the top 5% of earners.
Mm-hmm.
I think the green one, their tax doesn't it, it only affects like the top 2 or 1 percent, depending on which tax it is. But like I feel like for the rest of it, it's just like I don't know. It's just so I'm very disappointed. I don't know. I feel like I don't think Keir really has an ideology. I still don't
Oh
buy
no, he
the idea
doesn't.
that he's like a
No.
committed neoliberal. I feel like he would
Fucking
basically
neoliberalism.
become a Corbynite if he thought it would get him more votes. But I just feel like with the kind of space he has now in terms of the polls, I feel like they would have offered something. The fact that like Biden and in the United States with their plans, the bipartisan plans that even Republicans voted for, were massively more ambitious than what Keir is doing for us. Yeah, I don't know. It's just really sad.
Yeah, exactly. It's a recipe for Nigel Farage's PM in 2029. Because if we don't fix the cost of living crisis, if we don't give something for the people to hope for, in a world of where the way in which we approach macroeconomics in the West, especially, is going to be really like the clincher point as to whether we fall to like the populist right or not. And they're not offering enough stuff, and they have all of the room to do it because we're looking at the idea of a Labour Party getting over 450 seats and the Tories not even in opposition. They have so much room to be able to manoeuvre and they're just not doing it. That's why I'm voting for the Green Party and why I'm campaigning for the Green Party, is because we are the people offering that vision that the Labour Party just aren't doing. And we can do it for free now because there's just no risk of the Labour Party not forming the next government.
Yeah, I feel like from my own reading of the Green Manifesto, it feels like it's similar to what they had in Scotland. Like it always feels like their manifesto to me, on its own, feels like a little bit kooky. But when they were a minority in the coalition with the SNP, the fact is that a lot of those things in the manifesto they just get tempered a little bit, and then they actually produce really really good outcomes. Like we got so many cool things from the SNP Green Coalition. We got like fucking free bus travel. We preserved our free prescriptions. We got fucking like free dental care for people under 26. We got like protections for free education is still there. Yeah, we had so much more.
Progressive tax.
Progressive tax, yeah. But I wonder, like, can the Greens do anything like that in the UK elections? Because I feel like they're polling, despite everything from the, I guess, like left wingers being disillusioned by Labour, it still feels like they've been shuffling between what 6 or 7% for the entire last year.
I mean, that is a massive increase. They were polling it. I think they've never really broached like 2.5% in a national election. So going from 2% to 6, 7, 8, potentially even 9% in some polls that we've seen, I don't think that's going to happen. But there's the potential for it to be there in a world in which basically all of like the centre and the left at this point, the anti-Tory coalition, are very tactical voting pilled in a way the right wing clearly aren't, because they're happy to destroy the Tories by not doing so. They're still doing better than I would have expected, given how little money they've got, how little platform that they've got. They've not got GB News pumping out Richard Tice's Sunday sermon into people's ears every week. They've not got the ground. They've got a ground campaign. We've got 800 councillors we have now in the UK, and we've massively increased councillors at every single local election over the last few years. It's just in general elections, especially when the Tories are in government, it's difficult to get people who otherwise want to see the Tories out to not vote tactically. And I get it. I don't want you to vote tactically, but I think I understand where the rationale comes from, given how awful the Conservative Party are. But when Labour are the governing party, when it's not just like the disaffected leftists who've been kicked out, or they've been purged, or they've left, or whatever has happened, or they've campaigned for Corbyn, so they've been kicked out. If you've seen that, if they vote for the Greens non-tactically, and then come 2029, when there's like 50 or 60 seats where the Greens are in second place because people have decided we're going to build a movement in this constituency, we're going to get councillors elected, we're going to have a strong constituency Green Party to campaign with, when there's not the threat of the Conservative Party staying in power, I think there's a base to build on there. Like, base building is always worth doing, but of course in this election it's the big focus is on getting the Tories out. And you know what, I get it. And I think that there's room to manoeuvre. There was a poll that was done by YouGov that Stats for Lefties shared, which is that if people were voting regardless of the idea, if each candidate had an equal chance to win in their constituency, the Greens jump up to like 19%. Like there's
Really?
people do like them and like their policies, and I think they need to temper themselves somewhat and be a little bit more credible. I know that sounds pretty kind of cut the leftoid to say, but you know, if they changed it to be, at the moment it's fine to be out there, it's fine to be radical, it's fine to be ambitious when you're not having the role of governance thrust upon you, and that's fine now. And I think that's good to get people involved and show you what your vision is. But 2029, when we're going to be banging on about 50 Labour seats or something, that's when we need to start looking, not, you know, don't get rid of the ambition, but try and broaden the appeal, or so to speak, right? Try and win people over rather than trying to appeal to the crowd, if you, or try and preach to the converted. Sorry, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I can see in 2019 they got like they actually only won 2.6% of the vote, so actually going up to 8 in that time is actually quite substantial. So are you in like a safe seat for any particular party, or
It
you don't have to
was
share that, you don't
it
want
was
to?
previously a swing seat. I'm in Broxtowe, which is kind of flitted between Tory, Lib Dem, and Labour. And in fact, Tories only won it by 1% in 2017, but every swing seat is now a safe Labour seat, so I can vote Green and not care.
Oh yeah. I think for me it's going to be probably SNP because Labour are catching up on them, but I don't think they're going to win in my seat. They're not close enough.
Oh yeah, Labour are gonna be the new plurality party in Scotland, which is a shame. Which is a shame because I quite like the SNP for all of their faults, for all of the Joanna Cherries in this world. You know, at the very least, Stephen Flynn, especially as a rhetorician in the public sphere, challenges Labour from the left all the time, and I think that's an important voice. But I understand why they're collapsing. All the Preet Morel stuff, the constant media banging on about trans stuff, even though they have had good economic policy. And people go, well, the SNP, they only care about identity politics. And I'm just like, have you watched them in government? Like, especially in the Butte House Agreement, as you say, loads of progressive policy got passed. This idea that they
Yeah.
only care about trans stuff because they had one policy which spent 6 years in consultation and suddenly they're obsessed with IDPOL. I'm like, no, like the media, you're obsessed with IDPOL. You just don't pay attention when they pass new good economic policy.
Yeah, one thing I find really, really funny about the trans issues is that I don't know, you spoke to, who'd you speak to? Is it Lexibat about
I did, yeah.
the cash review? Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it's really funny that somehow that cash review, which I actually think I think it's a lot, I don't think it's as pro-trans as what they do in the United States, but I think it's a lot more pro-trans than a lot of people have made it out to be. I don't think it's like anti-trans. I don't put it out, I wouldn't apply that label to it. But it's funny that it's been able to be viewed by as anti-trans by enough people that like TERFs and like right-wingers think it's on their side, and now Labour are putting it through. They're saying that they're going to implement the recommendations of the cash review, which basically means we're going to get like more research into puberty blockers and things like that, and more like long-term and like national research than like almost any other country on earth has had. So that's kind of ironic that
And
that's
more
actually going
state
to go
investment
through.
into gender care as well. And get rid. They
Mhm.
say, oh, they can get rid of Tavistock, yeah, and then have 6 regional hubs with more funding and more staff. Like, okay, cool, good. Like, there are lots of problems with the cash review. I'm not going to say it's perfect, right?
Hmm.
But this idea that it's some kind of home that the turfoids can use to as vindication for all of their viewpoints, because clearly, you know, they say, as we've seen, J.K. Rowling clearly knows that it's not in their, as much in their favour as they think, because after saying, we're going to ban teaching gender ideology in schools, we're going to implement the caste review, we're going to protect single-sex spaces, you know, like J.K. Rowling's still not happy, wants to meet with Angela Rayner and Annalise Dodds and get Angela Rayner to rescind her description of LGBT Alliance as a hate group, and it's like, these people are never happy.
No, and it also like it doesn't really. I mean, it reserves blockers for research purposes, but it doesn't say that they should go. It doesn't rule them out completely. It actually says that they want research on it to be actually massively expanded, because that's the problem with it, is that there's not enough research. But yeah, I don't know, that was just really interesting how that managed to get achieved. But I don't know, like it feels like Labour are just going to get the whatever super majority that they're calling it, even though that doesn't make any sense in the UK. Like, do you think that any value in like, especially more like English people trying to still influence the party from within, or is that just like a lost cause to you now?
it's totally a lost cause, and the level to which it is, I don't think is fully understood by a lot of people. So I don't know if how much have you looked into the internal stuff that's been going on in the Labour Party over the last 2 years? Have you looked into it at all?
No, I left the
So
Labour Party like fucking 2021 or some shit. Yeah.
I mean, I was never like a member, but I'm still in an affiliated trade union. But I
Mhm.
joined the Green Party then mid last year, I think it was. But
Okay.
regardless. So do you know who Labour Together is? So Labour Together were this think tank that was set up in 2016 within the Labour Party. Ostensibly, it was to keep the party together rather than get into factional conflict. But its stated purpose was never its real purpose. What its real purpose was to make sure the right-wing Labour MPs didn't leave the party under Corbyn, so that they could have a large base of the PLP to be able to mount a challenge from the right when the Corbyn project, as they believe, eventually failed. So it was led by a man called Morgan McSweeney until 2020. It's now led by a man called Josh Simons. Josh Simons is an MP's candidate in a very safe seat. What a surprise. And what they did is they polled the internal membership during the Corbyn period, all the new members, all the old members, to find the kind of policies that they would vote for in a leadership election, because this is the same guy who ran 4% Liz's 4% campaign in the 2016
Mhm.
election when they lost to Corbyn. And so they said, we have to have a strategy to beat the leftoids this time. We have to have a strategy. So they just polled the members. These are the policies they like. It doesn't matter if we're going to actually stick to them, because clearly they haven't. All the pledges have been scrapped. Post-leadership election, they approached Keir Starmer. This was in 2017, just after the election hung parliament, and said, we want you to be our leader, to be able to retake the party from the left. So it was clearly all a plan in the background to take power away from the left. And whilst, there were a bunch of people who, like Matt Pound from Labour First, I think he's a member of, like a real kind of like the moderate, i.e. right-wing part of the Labour Party, who was there as part of the campaign team at the time. And when even told Owen Jones, no, we have no intention of purging the left. No, not at all. And since they've been in power, left-wingers have been purged, left-wing
Mhm.
candidates have been deselected, the rules have been changed, so the PLP has far more power in who chooses the next leader of the party if Keir Starmer steps down, so that the trade unions and the members have less of a say, because of course they're much more left-wing than the PLP is. On top of that, they've essentially gotten rid of the unions and of members to be able to affect policy at the National Policy Forum. All of what got passed at the NPF, which is essentially what was the prototype for the manifesto, was all just kind of given veto power by Keir Starmer and his Politburo. Because what happened when they lost the Hartlepool by-election is Keir Starmer wanted to step down. He wanted to step down as leader after they lost in Hartlepool.
Okay.
And so Angela Rayner tried to usurp him as leader, but of course the Labour right were like, no, we can't do this. We finally won. We finally have control. So essentially, Keir Starmer, as you say, I don't think he has an ideology. He may have believed the stuff, but he didn't know anything about economics. He had to be taught about economics by Lord Falkland when he became leader, so he didn't sound like a clown when he was talking about it.
Based.
And once they lost in Hartlepool, they were like, no, you're staying as leader, but you're doing everything that we say. The Labour right, the people in the Labour right kind of the Politburo in the background. You have to do whatever we say. So he's essentially subcontracted all decision making out to the kind of Morgan McSweeney faction of the party. And Morgan McSweeney is on record as saying, we want to put the left in a sealed tomb. We want to get these people out of the party. We do not want to be in a party with these people. So it was all done in the background. It was all lies. Or, it was all dishonest at the very least, as a method to try and make the party into what they believe to be a party of government again, but really just a centrist party, centre-right, social liberal party, but not even that socially liberal. You've seen the way they talk about small boats and immigration, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And all power has been stripped away from members, all power has been stripped away from unions. This is why union funding has dropped. It's why the Bakers Union disaffiliated a few years ago, and why they are trying to excise. You saw what happened to Diane Abbott, to Faisal Shaheen, to Lloyd Russell Moyle. They've been trying to get rid of Apsana Begum. A bunch of other left-wingers got deselected, like Mick Whitley and Beth Winter in Wales. They've just been methodically going through the party, not just ensuring that the left aren't in the party, but also ensuring that the power remains within the leadership, because they're the ones who impose candidates. In CLP, so obviously because they want to make sure the PLP is right-wing, after making sure that the rules are that PLP choose the leader, essentially. And so they are selecting only right-wing people to be MPs. So in my constituency in Broxton, there's a local champion called Greg Marshall. He's left of centre. He's not like a Corbynite or anything, but he's left-wing and progressive. And he was broadly loved by the community. At the selection event, he got a standing ovation. That's how much our constituents of the Labour Party loved him. And he got blocked from standing on the shortlist. So we had a choice of some councillor from Lewisham, who is the candidate, and some person called Anna Joy Rickard from the Tony Blair Institute, who also now set Labour policy along with Labour Together and the Resolution Foundation, these think tanks who are kind of part of the Starmer cadre in the party. And so we could have had like the popular local choice for a local MP, and we don't have one because he's too left wing. And this has happened everywhere in loads of seats. People like Lee Drennan, people like Maurice MacLeod, people like Lauren Townsend, people like the ones who've obviously been deselected is one thing, but people not being allowed to stand to be able to be chosen as an MP. That's all been tightly controlled by the people at the top of the party as well. That's where all the power has been centralised now. And so wrestling that power back can only be done by changing leader. And the way in which you change the leader is by getting the PLP to support you. And the PLP have now been selected by the people at the top of the party. It's a real closed system that's happened now. I do not think there's any ability to influence the party from the inside. Believe me, if I thought there was, I'd still be there. So I still believe in the Labour movement, still a member of an affiliated union, still believe the Labour Party could be a force for progressive change if these changes hadn't been made. But the door is locked, and it's locked shut, in my opinion.
Is that why you say affiliated union? Because like unions that are affiliated with the Labour Party, is that what you mean by affiliated, or
Yeah.
is that like the Mick Lynch thing? Yeah, because he's like not a member of Labour, but he's part of a union that obviously funds Labour and tries to do it that way.
No, he's not. The RMT are not affiliated to Labour. They got kicked out for proposing the Iraq War.
Oh, did they? Oh shit, they did. Yeah.
Yeah, they considered re-affiliating under Corbyn, but ended up not doing so. But the main affiliated trade unions are Unite, GMB, the CWU, and Unison, and then a couple of other smaller ones. Kind of ASLEF and TSSA are the rail unions that are affiliated. I'm the CWU, so I could technically still vote in leadership elections and things like that, even though I'm a member of a different political party at this point because of my trade union membership. But I never bother. So.
I wonder why, because Mick Lynch is still telling people to vote Labour, isn't he? He was saying to Ash Sarkar, but I guess I don't know if he means in the sense of like just if it's because I feel like in the UK it doesn't really matter who you fucking vote for unless you're in a swing seat. Like if you're in a safe seat, it doesn't matter who you vote for. Yeah.
I think, but like, at the end of the day, his job as a trade union leader is to do what is in the interest of his members, because that's the electoral mandate that he has. That's what trade union leaders are there for. And in his mind, the best thing for rail unions is to have a government that is in the Conservative Party in power, because that's how they feel like they can best organise for better pay. That's his role. And I think the more holistic idea of, well, the Labour movement has been the traditional force for progressive change. It may not be progressive now, but we can move them whilst they're in power. I can understand why he believes that. I just disagree. It's fine to have disagreements with people like this, but from what I have been doing, I've been covering the internal stuff in the Labour Party pretty fastidiously for the last couple of years, and I don't see what he sees. Especially because like the big point he made in the interview with Ash Sarkar, I think that's one you're referencing, was like we need to build council houses, like the Labour movement and the working class movement, like the force for change and to stop atomization. We need to bring back council housing in this country, and Labour have not committed any money at all on council housing.
No.
That's one of my red lines.
But they still put their 300,000 number up like every other party, even though no one can achieve it.
Well,
because I think Labour says they're going to do it with planning regulations. Yeah.
Tom Harwood from GB News, right, arch libertarian, was praising Rachel Reeves as being the supply side economist that Liz Truss wasn't, and because of her deregulatory plans for the economy. And I'm just like, well, not voting for this.
Yeah, like I've heard people say that planning permissions they have like levels of complexity that could be changed, but like the fact is that the only time we were ever able to achieve that many houses being built every year was when like half of them were council houses, right? So now it's like less than 15%? Yeah, there's no
crazy. We build more council houses under Boris Johnson in 3 years than we built in 10 years of Tony Blair. So I don't have high hopes. Like, so, it's mostly Sadiq Khan. Sadiq Khan's been really good on a council house building, but when there's going to be no state money for it, like Khan has the luxury of a gigantic London budget, but local authorities, they've got 40% budget cuts. That's from day-to-day spending, which Rachel Reeves has promised will only come from tax receipts, and they're not raising taxes. Councils are going bust left, right, and centre. How are Labour going to deal with this absolute kind of catastrophe in local government? Like billions, like tens of billions of pounds of local authority assets have been sold off to the private sector. Libraries, swimming pools, parks, like local amenities, youth centres that we need to be able to deal with this massive increase in mandatory spending on things like adult social care and temporary accommodation. And they need bigger budgets to not just buy these assets back, but to then to also deal with the further increasing costs of all of these problems. And if they don't raise taxes, they will not be able to pay for it under their own fiscal rules, and councils will still go bust. And they've promised not to bail them out either. So they've got like an omni-shambles worth of kind of catastrophes looming around the corner, and they have no plan to deal with it. It's really grim.
Omni shambles. Okay. Love it that my quote comes up. Wait. So when it comes to the idea of them having to either cut or otherwise raise taxes or borrow more, do you think they're most likely to pick the cutting over those three?
I think it'll be a mix of cutting and tax raise. I think they've been very coy about the taxes that they won't raise, which is VAT, national insurance, and income tax. And by that they mean, of course, the percentages, but not the threshold. They've committed to 3 more years of fiscal drag. So another immediate lie from the Starmer machine. What a surprise, he's lied about something else, because they will be raising income tax, just not the percentages, but the thresholds are staying the same. So with inflation, people will get pulled into higher tax bands over the next 3 years, which is what they've committed to. Jonathan Reynolds said this. But they have also been silent about their zero plans for capital gains tax increases. I think they will have to do it. I think they will have to increase capital gains tax, and probably change inheritance tax, because that's not going to affect any Labour voters. Even like the new Labour voters aren't really affected by inheritance tax. But even then, just a capital gains tax increase, I don't think touches the sides really and truly. Whereas obviously the Greens have these national insurance plans, and they have these wealth tax plans and these carbon tax plans, which Labour aren't touching with a barge pole. They're not even touching council tax, which is criminally unfair. A 3-bed semi in Bradford pays more council tax than Buckingham Palace. But they've been deliberately silent on a bunch of things that they might change later, because of course if you rule things out and things go south, that screws you over by breaking promises. So it's all a mystery box at this point. That's another problem I have, is that they're selling the public a mystery box.
Because even with inheritance tax, a lot of it is like loopholes as well. That's like the Greens were praised like all round for mentioning that. But council taxes, obviously, like that needs to be reassessed. Oh well, I don't know. I feel like how many seats are the Greens expected to get with their polling? Is it like 2 or 3 now, or is it still just the one?
I think my expectation is 3. They have 4 target seats. I think they've also got Bristol Central and Brighton Pavilion, which I think they're odds-on favourites to win now. They've also got Waveney Valley and North Herefordshire, which is kind of their Tory NIMBY seats that they're targeting. And I think they'll win Waveney Valley, but I don't think they'll win North Herefordshire. They've also got good ground campaigns in Isle of Wight East and in Sheffield Central, so they might win those as well.